there's no reason to be scared because we have to live without fear. That's really important. And if you want to tell a story, tell it. And, who knows how it's going to go, but don't make a compromise.
Welcome back, one and all, to episode 16 of Soft Revolution, the podcast. I'm Torquil Campbell.
I'm Ali Momin.
Amazing pod this week. We have the legendary Oscar-nominated film director Deepa Mehta later on to talk to us about all kinds of things, including the struggle as a woman and as a person of color in the world, but also in the world of art, but also just amazing advice. And she's a charming, lovely person, and it was great to talk to her. Ali, thank you for getting that get.
You know what? I got to give to the podcast.
You do.
That's what it's all about.
You give so
and,
little. You give so little to everything else. So it's important
this is
that.
Very true. This is very true.
It's not true. It's not true. How are you, buddy? How's your week been in this crazy, fucked up world?
It's good. We're at stage 2, baby.
Yes.
We're at stage 2.
Ali is in Toronto, as some of you may know. Stage 2 means what, Ali? What exciting...
It means I'm on a patio right now, bro.
You're on a patio now.
I'm on a patio right now.
Amazing. That's...
I'm drunk.
It means that all the douchebags of Toronto can come back out and start to make that city what it really, really is. And that, I guess,
right.
there's an up and down to that.
Yeah.
Does it feel different in the city? Does it feel like people are breathing
more?
Yeah,
people are breathing more. People are lining up to go to the malls. People are, dude, I don't know. There are also a lot of people who, the patios aren't as full as I thought they'd be. I walked by Queen Street today. I was walking my dog, and they're not really as busy as you would think. Hair salons, though, people are definitely just like going. Hair and nails are getting done.
Yes,
I think people are just like,
fascinating part of our identity. Those things, like the haircut and the things that you take for granted in the world. My wife cut my hair about a month ago, and now it's growing out. Really badly. And it changes the way one perceives oneself, just those little details of life, which I guess is another aspect of life, which is artistic, but also kind of elemental, is that thing of like, how do I look? And for a while, of course, none of us cared how we looked. We all just sat in our pajamas, and then you have to go back out into the world and remember how you presented yourself and why it mattered and all that stuff. It's really, really strange. Yes, big week in Toronto, strange week in the news. A concert happened this week in Barcelona. The Barcelona Opera reopened to a sold-out house. The only catch is it wasn't people. It was plants. Ali, did you hear about this?
Yes, I did. Yeah. And they were doing some Puccini. Puccini.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm just reading through this is the article from the AP, and it says, the idea of the concert came to conceptual artist Eugenio Ampudia during the lockdown, when the normal bustle of urban living was silenced. The sound of birdsong was much clearer, and the plants around his house grew more vigorously.
I kind of love it, I think I'd rather play to a full house of houseplants than a 30% audience. I really do, genuinely, because they are living things, and all kinds of studies have shown that music has profound effects on growth of plants. So I bet there was, in some respects, a very real sense of what it was like to play for an audience, because life is life, right? And
it was actually very moving, man.
Yeah.
It was very beautiful, very moving. And the artistic director, Victor Garcia de Gomar, he was saying it's like a visual poem, both a subtle metaphor, but one which makes us smile. And that is a perfect way of that's a good explanation of how I felt.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And I think, that it's playful. And it's kind of, I think that's a big part of what we need to start doing as performance artists, particularly. It's hard not to mourn our careers and our economy and the structures that we've built up around it. But it's also, the moment must be seized to completely reassess, not just like what the theater might look like in terms of diversity and in terms of power structure, but what the theater might look like and what live concerts might look like in terms of what they actually do and how they are made and where we make them and what it means to play a show, and all those kind of really profound things that can be scary unless you approach them in a playful way, which I think this artist did and the Barcelona Opera did in a really beautiful way, and reminded us, of the beauty of live performance. My overwhelming feeling at looking at the photograph, which is kind of a beautiful photograph of this small group of musicians and then this vast audience of plants, was I was jealous of the plants. You know what I mean? Like I felt like, oh, lucky plants. They get to do what
they have a better haircut than you do.
That's not hard, but they also have better seats than me, and they're having a more human experience than me. And I think that kind of flipping things, I'd love to see an audience played maybe to 1,000 cats or dogs. Why not? Let's get the entire animal kingdom in there. And let's,
it's because people aren't going. And this is something that I wanted to talk about is there were two bits of news. Obviously one that was very, very prominent, and that was our friend Donald's failure at Tulsa, where only 6,200 people showed up to this rally.
Tough show for Donald.
Yeah, we have a saying in the theater, Donald, when you can't sell the balcony, your show is closing. So...
Yeah, I love the photograph.
Call your agent, bro.
I love the photograph of him coming home, getting off Air Force One or whatever that helicopter is. I don't know what they call the helicopter, but he getting off the helicopter with his scrunched up MAGA hat in his hand, like with his tie undone. Motherfucker looked so much like he had just finished a 2-show day of Glengarry Glen Ross. It was unbelievable. Do you know what I mean? Like Murray he would be good if he could remember the lines. We could get a teleprompter up for him. I think he could really move. I think he could do it. But
check it, Torgo, check it. So he could only get 6,200 crazy people who don't give a shit to come out.
Yes.
But on the other end of the world in New Zealand, so obviously we've spoken about this. They have crushed the virus.
Yes.
Basically, do whatever the fuck you want. Now, movie theaters it's been a month where they've been fully open, no questions asked, no limits. And they are only I was reading at 17% capacity. So people, even when this vaccine day comes in, I think it's going to be a slow march to return to live performance. And it got me thinking about, we spoke about this with Michael Healy, and Michael Healy had a very kind of, a more positive view on it. He thought that everything would just go back to normal. I think Michael's wrong. I think what's going to happen is that it's going to be a very long time until people are allowed and willing to get together in a live crowd and to be amongst a lot of people. And I think aside from the exodus of the audience, the thing I think about is the exodus of talent.
Yeah.
There was a time, I was thinking about the theater, right? There was a time where our greatest writers all wrote for the theater. Eugene O'Neill, Arthur Miller. You would write for the theater. That was a place to write for. But now that's changed. I have friends who have won Doras, which for those of you who aren't living in Canada, is like, the one of the most prestigious honors you could receive in the theater. They've won multiple Doras, but they're fighting to get into a writer's room on TV. I have friends who are writers and they're Governor General's Award winners, which is like the highest thing you can get. And they are fighting to get on TV because that's where they want to write. I think of Vince Gilligan, who wrote my favorite show, Breaking Bad. Vince Gilligan, if this was the 50s, he would be Arthur Miller, who would be writing for the stage.
Yeah.
But of course, he's writing for television. And so now I think about that young writer who has such a profound talent, and you ask them, what are you going to write for? Why would they choose the theater?
Yeah.
Ever?
Yeah.
So I'm worried. Michael Healy, I'm worried.
I'm very worried. I'm very worried about the theater, and I'm not just worried about the theater because of that, which I think is valid, but I'm worried about the theater because I think I am seeing the theater implode. And I'm seeing the theater not ultimately face what it needs to face right now, which is how do we do this not the way we used to? I think there continues to be this urge to, change things for sure. There's definitely calls for change, but there's calls for change within the institutions. I'm not sure the institutions can survive. And if they can survive, they can only survive by lying dormant for at least 2 years.
And that's not a way to live.
And that's not a way to live. So that means again, like, let's be playful. Okay, so I'm seriously, and I'm sure you are, Ali, as well, considering what else I might have to do for money at this point. But that's not going to stop me from thinking about how I'm going to tell stories and who I'm going to tell them to. And if I have to tell stories to 2 people, or if I have to sing songs for 2 people, I guarantee you I will. This time next year, I will still be an artist. I might be a poor artist. I might be an artist that hardly anybody gets to see, but I'll be an artist because I decided long ago that I was going to spend my life doing this. And I think the theater has to look at the opportunities and the economic opportunities of this. As I said a few pods ago, if you are paying your equity dues right now, I would love to know why. I would love for you to get in contact with Soft Revolution Podcast and explain to me the logic behind you giving money to an organization which protects you from something that no longer exists. You know, it's ridiculous. And equity was valuable. In some respects, it did a lot to help actors in the early days of the theater growing. You could also argue that it's been very detrimental to theater in many ways. We won't go into that, but I will say this: forget it. Forget stage managers, forget the rehearsal hall, forget the set and the lights and the design and all that stuff. If you're in rock and roll, if you're a band, forget the clubs and the beers and the people lined up outside. That's gone. So how do you want to make this art, and who do you want to make it for? And I think there might be beauty there. It might be a theater full of houseplants. It might be a theater full of cats. It might be 5 people in a park. It might be some strangers under their window. But we have to start to change our metric about what an audience means and where we find that audience, and stop mourning what we've lost, because it's not coming back for a very long time. Sad but true.
Beautiful. Beautiful. We have to be resilient. And I've been reading a lot about resilience. I've been reading about something called post-traumatic growth. And this is something that psychologists are increasingly studying, you know, the possibilities of what's known as post-traumatic growth, that surviving hard periods in life can often make us more focused, more compassionate, more spiritual, and more aware of our own strengths and possibilities. We have all gone through a traumatic event as artists. And we have to ask ourselves whether we're going to have PTSD or whether we're going to have PTG. I'm for PTG. But there are some people who are still fighting. Did you read about Andrew Lloyd Webber?
No.
What he's up to?
Tell me.
Andrew Lloyd Webber, he wants to prove that theaters can reopen. He is turning the largest theater that he has in England. I don't know which one it is, but he wants that... He says he's going to put he's going to include a disinfectant fog that sprays, and it has like a 30-day lifespan that basically just like wipes out all viruses, and it's on you. And he's going to have these like crazy UV lights going and all that stuff. And because I think he realizes that it's an existential threat, because supposedly the government's coming out with some guidelines in the UK. And one of the things that they're going to say is that one thing is very dangerous is singing. They've actually banned singing and dancing on the patios in Ontario. They've literally said, do not sing, do not dance.
I mean, I grew up in Toronto, and I can say, while I understand why they did that, it's wholly unnecessary. Nobody sings and dances on patios in Toronto.
Torkel, you didn't go to Sheridan College, okay?
Well, and if I saw a bunch of Sheridan College students on a patio, I generally would go to the next patio, because I would be afraid that I'd be assaulted by Sondheim while I was trying to have my drink. No.
But I think Lloyd Webber knows what's up. He's like, we can't just sit back and wait. I think you just can't, because I'm sorry, a year and a half, 2 years, forget it.
Yeah.
Like it's just untenable, you know, it's just untenable. So
yeah, it's partly going to be about people getting past their fear, and it's partly going to be about the measures taken. And ultimately, I guess it's going to be about whether or not people, you know, I've heard people make the argument a lot. Well, don't worry, theater will be back. Live music will be back. It came back after the pandemic in 1918, or as Donald Trump likes to say, the 1917 flu.
The 1917.
But you know what? They didn't have Netflix in 1918. They didn't. They didn't have the internet. And society was much more connected and much more intimate place than it is now. And I'm genuine, it was no picnic trying to get people to come to the theater or come to concerts because there were so many bands out. 60% room before this happened was a good room, even for big bands. So, it was tough enough in the age of the internet to get people to come out. I am deeply worried that we're going to have expectations that can't be met. Does that mean there aren't people out there who are living for us to return? No, it does not mean that. There are people out there who are living for their next live show, who are living to get back to come from away, or living to go to a concert. And those are the people we have to think about, and we have to stay in contact with, and we have to start to get from them, what are you comfortable with? What would you do, and when would you do it, and where would you do it? And I think, more and more and more clinical research is coming out to show the spike did not happen. Your attempt, Ali, to spread COVID-19 in Trinity Bellwoods Park failed, apparently. There was not a spike in COVID-19 cases after the big Trinity Bellwoods debacle. There was not been a spike in cases that they can show is connected to the Black Lives Matter marches, which were heavily masked. If you watched any of the footage, I hardly saw a person in those marches.
I went to two of them. Yeah. Everyone had a mask.
And it looks like it worked. So we should be taking some comfort from that, and we should be advertising that. If I was the Stratford Festival, or if I was Live Nation, and I'll get to Live Nation in a second.
Oh yeah, they're driving in, baby.
But if I was one of those organizations, I would be spending a lot of money on telling people about how important it is to wear a mask, and I would be spending a lot of money on getting masks and on all the things that Andrew Lloyd Webber is going to attempt with his millions and millions of dollars. Not so easy, of course, for a not-for-profit artistic institution in a small town somewhere to spend that kind of cash to make people feel safe. But there are people who are willing to risk something to go back. And ultimately, there will be some risk. Life involves risk. It was risky to go to the theater in last January. You might have gotten the flu and died. And it will be risky this January. So I think, it's a conversation that has to happen between the artists and the audience, and not just a kind of, well, let's just sit here and wait until we can cram everybody back into these theaters, because that's going to be a long time.
I know, but I don't think the issue is so much with the artists and the audience. I think the issue is two things. Number one, the government, whether or not they're going to allow it. The protests and Trinity Bellwoods hasn't been really known to be like a super spreader event. But right now, Texas, Florida, huge spikes.
Yeah.
And the kind of contact tracing is that it's happening in bars, and it's happening in like indoors, close proximity, people getting together, being beside each other, and then going into their air-conditioned rooms. So I really still, even though Ali Momin was at Trinity Bellwoods, distanced from everyone.
Alone as usual with his dog.
Yeah, alone. I was just there by myself. Putting 1,000 people into a theater, laughing, crying, probably not the best idea. And I don't know what to say about that. That's just ultimately what it's going to be. The other thing, though, I think about is that a year and a half from now is going to go on or whatever. And this I actually do think is an opportunity. And I'm going to put my, they call me the genius bar because I'm a little techie. Apple is coming out with augmented reality glasses and virtual reality glasses that should push the medium forward like a leapfrog product in the way that when the iPhone came out, the iPad came out, and the watch came out, although the watch, whatever, these two products were like 5 years ahead of everyone. Bloomberg Business Week had an article out, and what they were describing, particularly for their virtual reality product, is next level, is something that you can, as an artist, stars can create a virtual reality show.
I sound like an old man, but I'll always push back against that. You'll still be alone. In your room, you will still be alone. And I
100%.
There's just nothing there's no virtual reality that can replicate having another human spirit beside you. But we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Well, the other thing that they're creating is something called augmented reality. So what they'll be able to do with glasses is they can place people in a room. So that kind of wild dream of the Star Trek dream where you have a conversation and the person beams in. That's ultimately what what an augmented reality glass could do. It could place people inside your existing room. I mean, I'm very bullish on this. I kind of think that, like, if I was a young writer or creator and I'm thinking about this, I'm like, this is, I think, where the puck is going. Because, you know, film and television, they're also having a lot of difficulty as well. Film and television, they're having difficulty as well, like making work. They're dealing with insurance. They're creating. The networks are telling their writers to get rid of kissing, get rid of touching.
It's like the 1950s
it's just a shit
again,
show, bro.
It's the 1950s.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this: does augmented reality, is that going to work on a Nokia flip phone? Because if it isn't, I'm going to be behind the curve on this one. I really, really am. I just finished a musical, dude.
Oh my God! Congrats!
I finished writing a musical with Ben Gibbard from Death Cab for Cutie and Daniel Handler, who writes the Lemony Snicket books. We've written this musical. There's a great part in it for you.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll send you
2024, man.
I'll send it to you, actually, dude.
Yeah, send it.
I will. I know, right? We're just talking about how the theater's done, and I'm like, I just finished writing a musical. But you know what? Like, I do think maybe
you got to keep going.
Yeah, maybe, and also, like, I do think Broadway, because there is so much money at stake, and they're venture capitalists, they'll find a way. Like, they'll spend the money. You know what I mean? To make people
it's just like film and TV. They don't care. Like, they're like, okay, we don't have insurance. Fuck it. We're gonna go until the end until we get the insurance. You know, okay, we can't kiss. Okay, fine, we'll figure something out. Like, there's just too much at stake to just kind of throw it away.
Yeah. So for the smaller things, for the smaller indie rock bands and the smaller theaters, it's terrifying. But, you know, we didn't do that job. We didn't get into that thing to make money. We got into it to change the world, and changing the world is still a possibility. So I'm trying to stay focused on that. I hope my fellow artists do as well. But it ain't easy when you have people like Live Nation, corporations like Live Nation, doing what they did last week. So I'm sure you read about this, Ali. Live Nation, which is a monopoly, which controls about 80% of all the venues in North America, and books many of the large festivals, along with Golden Voice, which is another giant festival organization run by a Trump supporter. But Live Nation put out a new set of policies, which included a 20% pay cut across the board for all artists for all concerts in the future.
In perpetuity?
In perpetuity. The right on the part of Live Nation to cancel your show and only pay you 25% of your money if you have not sold at least 90% of your tickets. The right to use, to stream, to record your concert, to use it for free in perpetuity, no rights reserved whatsoever.
What?
Yep. The list goes on, and it is offensive and ballsy and disgusting on a level that really took my breath away. I mean, I've been in the rock and roll game for a long time. I know that as Lorena McKennett, the great musician who made her way as a 20 million selling artist completely on her own as an independent, was one of the prototypical independent musician business people and really showed everybody how to play the game. She said to me when I started my career, the music industry is a cross between an abattoir and a loan sharking operation, and she was 100% correct. So I've had no illusions about the fact that the music industry has long been based on exploiting artists and trying to cheat them. But this is a kind of bald-faced disregard for the future of the art form that has heretofore been unseen. And, I spent the week on Twitter trying to ruin my career by tweeting at them that they can go fuck themselves. So I guess I should extend that to my podcast and say that, while it's almost impossible not to buy tickets from Live Nation, please try, and please write to them and say that you think what they did is repellent and disgusting and exploitative and ridiculous. Those numbers mean the end for bands like mine. Unless you're Coldplay, that's not going to work for you. So it's really a big fuck you to pretty much every artist that they have made their billions off of. It was done without any consultation, and it was presented as a fait accompli. There was no discussion about it. It wasn't a series of recommendations. They didn't go to the musicians and say, how do you feel about this? Because we're all losing money. It was simply plop, delivered in a press release, and we were expected to eat it. And the sad truth of the matter is that 95% of all independent music businesses and promoters are going to be closed within 6 months, unless there's a massive government bailout. And I doubt very, very much there will be a massive government bailout of rock and roll venues. And that's good news for Live Nation and for Ticketmaster. They're happy about this. They can ride this pandemic out. They've got $100 million in the bank or whatever.
Probably more.
Probably more. They control they've laid off 80% of their hardworking staff, the people who actually made their money for them. And so now they're sitting and waiting until they control every venue, and they can basically name their own price. And you know what it brought out in me reading this thing after 20 years in music and working, on the biggest level. I've played Coachella twice, and on the smallest level, there are still places. Stars is a weird band. Some places we go, we play to 5,000 people. Some places we play to 100. So I still play the small clubs, and I play some of the big rooms too. I'm going to do everything I possibly can to never work with those fucking scumbags again. Not because I think it will hurt me, but because I can't physically cope with the idea of acquiescing to that kind of disgusting business practice. You know, it's Trumpian. It's Trumpian. And I was really hoping that, remember that time when COVID-19 came, and for a week we were all like, we're all going to get together and it's going to be different. We're all going to treat each other better and be kinder and do business differently. And everybody put out their little ads about how hard it was for everybody. And all the corporations jumped on board with their social media posts about how Black Lives Matter and yada, yada, yada.
I got an email from a coffee shop telling me Black Lives Matter. It's like,
well, you didn't know until then, Ali. It must have been great for you, because I know you.
Yeah, it was so weird.
You were doubtful. And it's just the kind of worst of corporate thinking that I was hoping would disappear, and is clearly instead they're going to double down on it. So fuck you, Live Nation. I hope you go bankrupt, and please try to avoid buying tickets from them in the future.
Well, how can you? I mean, is there going to be a revolt?
Well, I think there will be a revolt in the sense that on a very small level, and I think this goes back to what we were talking about with the theater as well, there's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity to move into different kind of venues and work with different kinds of people, and it's going to take extra work. You can't sit back and expect things to change unless you do the work to change them. And so it's going to mean my band, for example, saying to our booking agent, we're not going to work with Live Nation. Well, our booking agent's not going to want to hear that, because he has relationships over there. They always offer the best price per se, given that they have the largest venues and they control everything. So he doesn't know any of these little indie promoters, but if it means that he has to go out and at the age of 48 rediscover his game, then I'm sorry, that's on him, and everyone has to take that responsibility, whether you're on a board of directors, whether you're an agent, whether you're an artistic director, whatever you are in the cultural sphere, whether you're an artist, you're going to take some responsibility on for things having to be different now. And we can't just expect somebody else to do it for us. We gotta take the responsibility.
Well, speaking of Live Nation, didn't they announce a drive-in concert series?
Did they?
And they have they did. At first I was like, I was going to send this to you and be like, look, Live Nation doing good, but you know what? Fuck Live Nation.
I drove back to my house last night, actually, along the highway, and I passed a drive-in concert on the side of the highway. They were doing a drive-in concert, and I just looked at it. I was like, that looks really, really grim. That doesn't look fun at all.
Right.
Right. I mean, from a musician's perspective, I don't know how it was for the people at it, but that looked like sex with 100 condoms on to me. That's
basically. Well, they want to make it like a tailgating thing, and they're going to draw out lines. And it's like so there's a Missouri show that Nelly's doing, and there's going to be a capacity to fit 1,000 cars while incorporating social distancing, and grills and barbecues are not permitted, but concert goers can bring pre-cooked food and drinks, including alcohol.
Jesus, freeze-dried. William Gibson, take the decade off. We've got dystopia covered. There's no need for you to write any more novels. We're there.
This is why I'm bullish on the VR, bro. I know in the AR.
Yeah.
I think there's something there. I think
there's
That's
exciting stuff, especially from an accessibility point of view. I mean, certainly that's an amazing possibility. If you're a disabled person and you're unable to travel and you've never seen, the Taj Mahal or Venice, pretty incredible to think about the possibilities for people to experience things they haven't been able to. So I am excited in that respect about how it might open up accessibility. Listen, let's not wait any longer, because this is such a great conversation. And again, as I say, we're trying to get you motivated, and we're trying to make you feel you're not alone. And Deepa Mehta in this conversation did both those things for me. So let's hear it. This is the great Deepa Mehta.
Okay, so Deepa, first of all, I love you. I miss you, and I hope you're doing well. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. I mean, I sort of grab. There are moments that I just say, okay, this is really bizarre and a surreal time, and I feel I have to. I can't do anything. I just feel stuck, or I feel time is melting, or it's weird. And then there are times I say, oh, God, this is great. I have so much time to think. But I'll tell you something. I'm certainly not doing yoga all the time. I'm not doing Pilates. I'm not meditating. But I am, I don't know how people can do all of that. I mean, I envy them. I wish I could.
It's really a time of extremes, isn't it? I like what you just described. I think that's so how I feel. And I've heard so many people talk about that real swing between feeling very at peace with it and kind of joyful about it. And then suddenly you just feel completely lost and like you've lost your identity,
And such strange things, not strange, good things are happening, but also strange things are happening. And they all,
Yeah.
I wonder if they would be happening if there wasn't a pandemic where there has been time and a moment to actually let it sink in that, of course, Black Lives Matter. Of course, uh, colored lives matter. Of course, uh, performances matter. Things that we just take. I don't. We haven't paid much serious thought to. I mean, where are the all? We think of artists. It's we just don't think of them in the same way that we always have. So it's sort of a very strange time.
Deepa, injustice, discrimination, and unfairness, these are themes that permeate so much of your work. Your famous trilogy, Earth, Fire, and finally Water, for which you were nominated for an Academy Award, they tackle this head on. Your newer work, including Anatomy of Violence and now Funny Boy, which you are in post-production, much the same. As I said, I have had the deep privilege of not just working with you, but also I'm proud to consider you a friend. I've witnessed, even outside the realm of your work, your steadfastness and forever standing up to that which you think is unfair or unjust. So with all that is happening in the world right now, like, where are we as a species? Where is the arc of justice headed? Are you hopeful?
Ali, you always ask tough questions. Am I hopeful? There are times, exactly what Torque was saying earlier. There are times I feel really hopeful. When I see what's happening, and the what's happening in the United States with the protests and the desire for change. I mean, it just feels that uh, there is hope, and then I feel there isn't any, because then I start questioning whether people, s- are saying what is politically correct about BIPOC or about colored people, or just sending all these messages out saying that we support uh, creativity, we support uh, the fact that colored people or black people have no voice, and I don't know how true that is. I mean, so I've become very skeptical. I mean, to cut a long story short, and so sometimes I'm hopeful, and sometimes I'm a skeptic. I,
I was saying to Ali, though, that this is something that you have, I'm guessing, been facing since you arrived in Canada and started to make films, is discrimination and people not giving you chances that maybe they would have given to someone else. Do you feel, looking now at young people and this sort of crisis point that we've reached, and especially in the arts, because what's
Mhm.
happening is that it's not just a conversation about general discrimination and white supremacy in society, but it is also telescoped down into people really talking about artistic institutions, how the film business
Mhm.
runs, the music business, the theater.
Mhm.
You must have been here for this conversation many times before.
Uh,
Does it feel different this time to you?
uh, Firstly, I was really lucky because when I came, which was in the 70s, perhaps, there was, the Canadian film industry was just growing in that point. So there wasn't, I
Right.
certainly felt that if I was a bank teller, or I had a sort of what was called a normal job, I might have faced discrimination. But there were very few people around making films at that point. So, and they were all looked at as if they were not regular anyways. So I sort of,
Right.
and that was an interesting period. It was much later that the discrimination started. And I think,
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Tell me about.
when it was in the, I think that when I made, by the time I made Sam and Me, which was my first feature here in Canada, there was no way that I didn't get any, uh, there was no support for it. First of all, because it was
Mm.
a story about immigrants and Indian immigrants, and though I think it was just quite different than anything that at that point the Canadian funding bodies were open to accepting or not. So that was fascinating. Finally, we didn't get money from Telefilm Canada. We did get from OFDC, but most of it actually came from an American distribution house, which is interesting. Because
Isn't it?
at that
Yeah.
point, by that early 90s, it was established that Canadian film industry was growing, and it was more and more obviously a white industry. I think there was only Krishna Srinivasan who'd made this wonderful film called Masala. I think uh, that had in Canada, that had been released at the same time, but
Mhm.
I certainly didn't get funding, and but it wasn't so much about my color as much as it was about my gender. So I feel,
Uh-huh.
in
Right.
retrospect, that I was not a guy. I was definitely, and I wanted to make a film about guys, not unlike Biba Boys, which I, did with you, Ali. But it was
Mhm.
it was more about being a woman. But that's another kind of discrimination.
And do you feel, when you're watching the conversation happen now, because it's fascinating that you say that you felt the discrimination was more about you being a woman. I feel like misogyny is a perennial favorite. No matter what, humanity seems to agree that women should never get a fair shake.
Yes.
Even women seem to agree with
Mhm.
that a lot of the time. Um, so is that, like, because I remember growing up in Canada at that time, when Sam and Me came out,
Mhm.
it was a country of immigrants. It was a country of new experiences and people arriving here from all over the world and bringing their stories and their trauma and their history with them and sort of interacting with each other. But I remember that at the time, it was very much about sort of like, well, how can we make a Hollywood film here? How can we get a TV star from some series that nobody's ever heard of to be in it? How can we make it playable to the states? And then yet you say that you got investment from the states for making a quintessentially Canadian immigrant story. So there's so many kind of different levels of Kafkaesque weirdness in all of that. But do you still feel that being a woman is if there is a hurdle for you now, having had the legendary career that you've had and all the accolades and all of the experience that you have, is being a woman still something that holds back your projects, do you think?
Uh, I wish I could say yes. I mean, I love playing the victim. Sorry, but it's not true. I mean, I don't think that I feel right now where not that because. I've done great work or done substantial amount of work, but I just don't feel that anymore. I don't think it's true for me because I've been lucky. Uh, you know, distributions distributors from different countries have made my work possible, and Telefilm and CBC or OMDC or
Right.
whatever it's called now, I don't know, have been have been taking me seriously. So I can't complain about that. But does it mean that it's gone away for everybody? I think it's tough being colored. I think it's tough being a woman. But if you're a colored woman, it's much tougher. That's the reality.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Right.
no taking away
Yeah.
from that. And so for young people who are starting out right now, I think that what's happening right now is hopeful because even if they're doing it as if they, the people who make decisions about funding stuff are doing it because as a gesture of tokenism. I mean, I'd like to think they're sincere, but I don't know. If they're doing it as tokenism, take it, I say. Take it and do it. Take that opportunity.
Well, I was going to ask you, Deepa, about tokenism because I think what a lot of performers of color have come to terms with is that feeling of tokenism. Can you talk about that? Have you felt tokenized? Can you go on further about what you would say to performers and artists and filmmakers who are BIPOC or
Uh,
whatever?
I would. I mean,
Can
I
you go
think
on?
that
Yeah.
it's really. I think tokenism exists. There's no question about it, and especially now because everybody's sort of like I said, I'd like to think that people are sincere when they say, when all these letters are coming out from all these people and all these institutes saying that, we would like to apologize for, uh, not being aware or whatever this, you know what I mean. Uh, that you
Yeah, yeah.
just, I take it with a pinch of salt because I really do feel that perhaps a part of it, how is it going to change? What are it's okay to send a letter of apology, but are you going to appoint a black person or a colored person or a black actor or a colored actor or an Asian actor in uh, in a leading role of Anne with an E? I mean, forget it. So it has to, our
Right.
stories have to change. So the people who say that, okay, we have to do these this series, which is we're going to do Handmaid's Tale or something, but those are all white things. What are we going to do? Who are the story changers? That's what's important. And how is whoever funds them, they have to be aligned with the stories that colored people want to tell. And who are those? Are they going to change? That's the big
Mm.
question. And I feel for the artists. I feel for the actors. I mean, for me, it was really important. It continues to be important that I we get actors for our films who can play anything.
Hmm.
Why does somebody why can't Ali play a lead that's supposed to be white? Why not? I don't understand that.
It's so funny. I watch a lot of things now. I've been watching things from just years ago, and I'm seeing just all these white people on camera, and I'm now asking my question like, why is that? Why can't I be there? Why can't a black person be there? To the point where I'm just like, even when I see a family scene, I go, why can't there be a brown actor there? Why can't there be a black actor there? What are these constructs that we are
I've
making
noticed that
to
too,
ourselves?
Alice.
Yeah.
I watched Back to the Future with my kid the other day,
Mhm.
and every single face in the movie is white except for one extra who suddenly
Wow.
appears at the back of the screen. You suddenly see this black guy, and when we watch those films as a white child,
Mhm.
I never thought about it. I never thought about it. And now looking at it, I think, my God, all my friends of color back then, I never thought about how they thought when they saw that.
Well, I mean,
And
yeah, sorry.
it's crazy,
Yeah.
that I didn't think about that.
Yeah, it is,
It's wild. Speaking of stories, though, I want to ask you, because I'm fascinated by this question, because I'm trying to write. I'm a musician and I write songs mostly, but I also write other things. and I'm trying to be creative. I'm hustling, Jesus, I'm scared I'm going to lose all my money,
Yeah.
so I'm really working hard. Are you going to make a film about this? Do you have a pandemic film in you? And if you don't have a pandemic film in you, is the next film you're going to make going to be influenced somehow by this experience? Do you think that your filmmaking will change because of it?
Tork, I think that all my films have been based on a pandemic. They have been about, all of them have been about, where do I stand in society?
Uh-huh.
What does it mean to be in where you're always the other? And that
Right.
is exactly what the pandemic has done. I mean, except now it's
Right.
a physical one, but for me, it's always been an emotional one. So,
Right. Right.
I keep on thinking that, all my films are pandemic based. So that's.
Deepa, Torkel and I talk about, we have this hope that, so we've gone into the shit and now maybe we can just reset and we can make a new world. I know it sounds very utopian, but I know personally, I've heard you lament certain things about the industry, like technically the difficulties it is for you to make a movie, even you, Deepa Mehta. Are there things that you would like to, now that we have this opportunity, let's hope, are there things that you would like to profoundly change about making a movie in Canada?
I think that yes, I would. And I have the way that I think it can be changed, because we do not, we still are dependent on government funding. So I think what I would really like to change is the way the funders are chosen and who they are. And if they are, and this is not to diss anybody who's white, I mean, but I would really like, if you want to have a vision of what this utopian world that you talk about, Ali, what will it look like? It can only happen in Canada if the people who actually greenlight uh, the utopian world story with colored actors or with diverse stories, if they actually understand it. And I'm sorry, I think there are very few that do. We pay, and it's good. And I mean, much better than the United States. But I'm tired of even saying that. I mean, uh,
Right.
if we say that we are multicultural, it's that we are a diverse country that really wants inclusion. That I think is those are, I think, just words. I mean, I don't doubt some of their sincerity, but what the hell are you doing about it? You know.
It's really fascinating that everything always, the onus of all of this change is always, it always starts with the artists. And of course it's important that the artists change, but if the audience doesn't change and the people, as you say, who are handing out money don't change, and that diversity isn't Canada's diversity isn't reflected in those levels of the artistic circle, then we can change as much as we want as artists, but it won't change for the people out in society that are seeing it. So do you see a way, like if you were put in charge of, say, reorganizing telefilm in terms of how things are applied for and who is giving out that grant money, where does that start? Does it start with quotas? Or does it start with a more kind of organic approach in the sense of going to communities, finding out who in the Indo-Canadian community, for example, are knowledgeable about film? Where do you go to make that change?
I, I think that's a very good question, but I don't know where you go. I mean, I don't think that you put an ad in the paper and say, I want a colored person who knows the pulse of the
Right.
Indo-Canadian thing. I mean, I don't think it works like that. I think it would work
Uh-huh.
if people, because what you said something that was very important, which is that okay, so you have somebody who's, let's say, colored and who has a pulse on what the Indo-Canadian or Black Lives Matter, or Asian a person would want to tell the story. But finally, it's like, how do you because it is about education. How do you educate
Mhm.
the audience? Will the audience accept it? So I think that one has to put aside the fact about the audience and say, regardless of what the audience feels or not, or because nobody knows what an audience is going to like or not. We have to do this. And we have to make 70% of films that we have to fund have to be around the stories of black or colored or BIPOC people. There's no question about that. And we have to forget that, oh, will we get an audience? Will we get a distributor? What you have to do it because that's how you actually, build an audience. You build it by throwing things at them, and some will stick and some won't. My father was a film distributor. I grew up in India. And he said there are two things in life. And I told him I wanted to forget not do my philosophy, PhD, or whatever. And he said, okay, you want to be a director, but you must understand and accept the fact that there are two things in life you never know about. One is when you're going to die. When are you going to die? You never know when you're going to die. And the other is you will never ever know if a film is successful. And that is absolutely true. So, but
in what sense do you mean that?
Because you don't, nobody, how do people right now say, okay, I like the story, but I don't think it'll fly, the funding bodies.
Right.
I mean, how do they know? Nobody does. But you have to take a chance. That's what I mean. And that's what my dad meant. And I think he was absolutely right.
Well, this is something that it's so funny. I'm talking about the privilege of white people. I say the privilege that exists is that white work is allowed to be mediocre.
Yes.
And you know what I'm saying? It's like you could do a show or a movie full of white people and it could suck.
It's not only allowed to, Ali, it very often is.
It's encouraged. I know. Yeah. But like if a bunch of brown people got together, a bunch of BIPOC people got together, they did something and it wasn't whatever. It's like, oh, there you go. We gave him a chance. So yeah, we need to, as you're saying, Deepa, we need to just, say, fuck that. We're going forward. This is what it's going to be. And you know what? Some of the shit's going to be mediocre. And I've seen a lot of your mediocre shit, and that's okay.
We see a lot of mediocrity anyways. So why can't it be colored mediocrity?
Yeah.
Because that's, why not? And some of it will be fabulous. And it's the same way with actors. Why not? Why not have a colored actor or a black actor or an indigenous actor? Why not?
Yeah, and the reason because the audience is uncomfortable with it is no longer it's just not an answer anymore.
Absolutely not. That's bullshit. And because that's what I'm saying, what my dad said. Nobody ever knows how a film's going to do, so why not? And it was Brecht who said something that's wonderful and always sticks with me. I think, what did he say? He said, all art, everything is political and art is the hammer. And I thought, yes. Right.
Yes.
Because right now, using what we're all in, whether you're a musician or an actor or a writer like you, Ali, you're an amazing actor. And you have a voice, you have a presence, you eat up the screen. And it's just, why not? Why shouldn't you be there? It's because somebody thinks, oh, there's no audience for a story which is about or is led by a brown actor. That's rubbish.
Well, Deepa, because they have to justify my existence.
They
have to somehow do a whole rigmarole to explain why somebody with my pigment is there.
I also think it's because I think that's true, and I think it's about the extra work because, I know the theater best, I guess, other than music, and in the theater, to me, there are not enough writers of color who are being hired by theaters to write plays about their experience and about the experience of so many people in society. But it's also about every single way in which the theater is set up that is white, that doesn't reflect aesthetically other cultures, the snacks they sell in the lobby, the drinks they sell, the way the seats are, the way the architecture is all comes from one culture. And so to me, there's a really big missed opportunity, an exciting opportunity, especially in Canada, to start to physically make these places more welcoming to people of different cultures.
Listen, I'd
And
be very happy if they started, selling samosas. I mean, that's far more interesting.
right.
Oh, wonderful.
No, but I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's a really big psychological thing. You know, if you're an Indo-Canadian person who brings your kids to come from away, for example, right? And you walk into the lobby and it doesn't look like something that you would like. You wouldn't design a theater lobby that way, and it doesn't have any food that your family likes, and it doesn't have a mango lassi, and it doesn't have the things that make up your culture. You feel like, oh, this isn't for me. This is made for
Mm.
someone else. And I think that the discussion has to get even deeper than who's doing it into how we're doing it and how we present it to people and how we sell it.
Or even bigger, like, who are we? Like, what does
Yeah,
it mean to be
exactly.
Canadian? What does it actually mean? You know, and to have more complex answers than just a standard kind of Eurocentric kind of idea, which I think is what you're saying. It's just so
Yeah, and
Eurocentric.
to be Canadian might to be really Indian. Like today to be Canadian, when I see this show, I have a mango lassi, and that's part of Canada too. Just because it's not white Canada doesn't make it not part of our culture, I guess,
But I have to
is what.
add something, which is what happened for a long time and maybe is changing now. And correct me if you think differently. Not correct me. Talk about it if you feel differently. But uh, at least for a large part of when I was doing my films and continue to my films, and it's only recently that things have shifted, that I think that Indians themselves did not like my films because they did not
Mm,
represent Indians in a way that they wanted to be represented, where
uh-huh.
they wanted to be accepted by life. It's a very interesting, psychological colonious, colonized people's uh, thinking. And do you know what I mean? Or is that too obscure?
Absolutely. Ali, talk about that because I think that might be part of your experience as a young artist and coming from where you do. Did your parent were your parents concerned that you would present yourself in the world as a Persian in a way that wouldn't represent Persians well?
Torkel, Deepa, my dad listens to this podcast. And whenever two things, if I shit on Trump or if I shit on the Iranian regime, he calls me and he goes, "Hey, you should edit that because you never know." And the other thing he'll say about the Iranian regime, he thinks somehow the Iranian regime is listening to this thing. And he's like, "Look, you have to watch out. You have to be a good Persian boy." So he's listening to this. Deepa, just because you're here, he's not going to ask me to correct it. But if you weren't here,
Well,
he'd tell me to correct it.
he's a
Uh,
charming man. I mean, he really is. And but that's what I mean. There
yeah.
is such a desire in people of your dad and your parents' generation, my generation. I know people, who really, whether they like it or not, want white approval. And that is
Yeah. Yeah.
so unless that changes, to say, okay,
Mm.
you don't need it, we're fine, really. And I think it's changing now with
Yeah.
this younger generation.
You have to be able to make art that's profane, right?
Yeah.
You have to be able to make art that spits on the ground, that does the wrong thing, that shows people to be shitty sometimes. Like there is a lack of freedom in constantly being responsible, I assume, for presenting your culture in a way that other people want you to present it. It
No,
kind of
absolutely.
it's an imposed it's a constraint.
Peter Sellers thing happened for so many years. I mean, unless you spoke with a funny accent, you were not being genuine. Because the expectation that, okay, all Indo white people or Canadians or Americans or whatever spoke in the sing-song accent. And so whether you are hired to be a cab driver, what did I see recently? Where I've forgotten. I mean, there was a cabbie and he was Indian, but he spoke with this really strange accent. And this is a very popular film. I mean, a couple of years ago or something. So as recent as that. And he said, no, oh yeah, Deadpool. There you go. Where was the cabbie who picked up Ryan Reynolds' character, Deadpool, whatever, uh,
Ugh.
was an Indian or Desi or Pakistani or whatever. and but he spoke with the accent. That's what I mean. So that is what is wanted, even if the people did not uh, don't want to do it. Artists, what do you guys do then? What do we women do if this is what's expected of us? That this is the template, you have to fit this, otherwise you aren't genuine. So you have a series where people talk funny. That's not true.
No, sorry. I asked myself like just how much I've been a part of the problem. How much of things that I've accepted. And this reminds me of something. Did you see Hassan Minhaj? He was on Ellen, and he was always as Hassan Minhaj, and he corrected
Mhm.
Ellen DeGeneres. He was like, no, it's actually Hassan Minhaj, and he was teaching her how to say his name. And he was
Mhm.
like, look, I got to say Timothy Chalamet all day. If y'all can say Timothy Chalamet, you guys got to learn how to say Hassan instead of, And he was talking about this on his show, and his dad was a big fan of Ellen.
Ah,
And his dad was like, Hassan, why would you do that? Why would you just let the lady speak? Let the lady just say whatever she
good
wants.
for
And
him.
she said, Dad, the difference is this. Your generation simply wanted to survive. My generation wants to live.
Good
And
for
I
him.
think that's a really good way to articulate it. But I got to say, Deepa, you have always demanded life. I don't ever think you were somebody who was like, no, I'm merely going to survive. And I think that's what's been such a hallmark of your kind of success. You never really settled for just surviving. So 30 years, it's going to be now 30
Yeah,
years. You spoke
yeah,
about Sam and me. We're
yeah,
almost there. It's
yeah.
30 years, right? So if like Deepa Mehta, you're going to hate this question, but I'm going to
Mhm.
ask you anyways. If Deepa Mehta of 30 years
Mhm.
ago came to you today and asked for advice on making movies, what would you tell her? Or on being an artist, what would you tell her?
Um, uh, mm, I would actually tell her not to be scared. That it's okay not to make compromises. You don't have to make compromises, and because I was scared. I was scared of going. It was my first film, so I mean, naturally, I'm scared. I don't know what I don't know much about lenses or technical aspects of it, but I was scared of taking the risk. But there's no reason to be scared because we have to live without fear. That's really important. And if you want to tell a story, tell it. And who knows how it's going to go, but don't make a compromise.
Deepa Mehta, thank you so much. I love that woman. Man, I love that woman so much.
So you know her very well. She's a friend. Like what I
Yes.
took away from that was be a radical, like think radically, accept that being a radical means being imperfect and that things won't be always great. You know what I mean? That's part of
Yeah.
massive change, which I thought was a really refreshing thing to hear because, as you said in our conversation, there's so much pressure on people of color to produce perfection once they get the chance.
Yeah, to
It's
be
like,
perfect all the fucking time.
yeah, you got to make something important. You got to make The Color Purple.
Yeah.
You can't just make like a shitty romantic comedy with some brown people in it. It suddenly has to mean something. And I thought that was really cool that she said, even mediocrity is important in this change. But what was your takeaway from it? Like, what did you learn that you didn't know about her?
We did you know, Deepa, it's what did she say? We did a gangster movie, and I always said to her, I'm like, Deepa, you're like the original gangster because you like do whatever the fuck you want. And she is just it's interesting that what she said at the end, that I would tell the younger version of myself to be less scared
Yeah.
because I consider her so fearless.
Right.
I found that to be so interesting and vulnerable and contradictory and kind of like brilliant and messy and just exquisite. And these are all the things that Deepa is.
Well, I guess she's
And
courageous rather than fearless, right? I mean, because courage, you can operate with courage while still being afraid, So I think that's probably
100%, 100%.
How she found it. Anyway, amazing conversation. So let's close this up. That was Soft Revolution, but there's one big thing that we want to talk to you, gentle listeners, about before we go. We've been doing this now for 4 months since the beginning of this crazy pandemic, and we love doing it. It's meant the world to us to have a place to go and talk to each other, but also talk to some amazing thinkers about where we're at as artists and where we might have to go in order to get back to something resembling life. And it's really meant a lot to me every week to speak with Ali and to hear his thoughts and reflections. And he's taught me a lot, but just also knowing that there are people who are listening and responding has meant a lot. And we want to keep doing this, but it takes time. And it especially is taking time for Ali right now, who does all the editing himself and organizes all of this stuff and gets our guests for us. And so in order to make that happen, and in order to spend more time on Soft Revolution and get better guests and spend more time researching and more time editing and continue to give you a better and better show, we need to raise some money. We need to make this pay somehow. And so our initial plan around that is to start a Patreon page. If you're not familiar with Patreon, go check it out, patreon.com. It's an amazing website that allows not just artists, but podcasts, thinkers, people with projects, people with inventions that they want to pursue, to collect patrons who pay a monthly membership fee and receive in return stuff, whether it's live music with bands or recorded music with bands or merchandise or writing. In our case, we're going to start a Patreon for Soft Revolution, and we're going to offer you extra content. We're going to make a couple of extra episodes every month that we're going to call After Hours, which feature Ali and I talking more about art, but also about a whole bunch of other stuff around the news and in the world. And we're also going to, from this moment forward, start asking our guests some questions that we will present as a questionnaire. So here's the deal, folks. We're starting a Patreon page. Ali, what's the name of our Patreon page?
TBD. No, what is it? Soft Revolution.
Soft Revolution. If you look up Soft Revolution on Patreon, you'll find us. We're going to start with just a few tiers. It's going to be simple. We're not asking much. If you can spare it, we know times are tough. And if you can't, that's no trouble at all. We are so happy you're here listening to us. We are deeply grateful you take the time every week to do so. But if you can, and you're interested in hearing more of Soft Revolution and more of what me and Ali have to say about the world, join us on Patreon. There's a few tiers there. We're going to offer a few bonuses and some fun stuff. There'll be a community message board, and we're really hoping that the Patreon page turns into a center of community around the conversations that we're having here on Soft Revolution.
Definitely.
And so that you guys can all exchange ideas with each other and talk to us, because this has to be a two-way conversation, and it has to be a long one. You know, we reject the idea that social media can solve the world's problems. We reject the idea that you, nuanced, beautiful, complicated people, are able to express your thoughts and feelings accurately and fully on those platforms. We think there's more to life than just likes and dislikes and retweets and bullshit like that. And we feel like this is a place where that might happen. So all that to say, we will be starting a Patreon page in the coming days. We will have more information for you about it next week. But if you're interested, go to patreon.com, search Soft Revolution, and stay in touch. We'll be growing it. And that's it for another episode of Soft Revolution. Ali, what's your art pick this week?
I have a song that I want to play at the end, but in terms of my art pick, by the way, we should be asking our guests what they want,
right?
What their picks are.
We're so stupid.
You know, we're learning. We're growing.
So stupid.
But I'm actually going to pick something from Deepa. If you go to Apple TV Plus, there is a show called Little America, and it chronicles stories of American immigrants. And she directed the first episode. This was produced by Kumail Nanjiani and his wife, Emily V. Gordon. And the first episode is entitled The Manager. And it's about a 12-year-old boy named Kabir whose parents get deported and who then has to run their hotel. And in pure Deepa Mehta fashion, it is beautifully done, political, human. And for some reason, she has this like insatiable ability to wring out the most incredible performances from children. And she does it She really just it's incredible. So that is my pick. And my music pick, unless you got something, my music pick is out of Venezuela. It's this guy Simon Diaz, and it's a song called Tonada de Luna Leña. It's was in this Pedro Almodovar film. And it's just unbelievable. I have really kind of like not heard music like this, and what a beautiful falsetto from this gentleman. And that's my music pick.
I can't wait to hear it.
What about you?
Well, I have a little bit of a strange one this week. I have an esoteric one. You know, the weather has gotten warmer, the nights are longer. My pick this week is the music coming from people's windows. So I'm going to suggest that you, at some point this week, get your mask on if you're living in the city, go out for an evening stroll, and walk until you hear someone practicing a piano, or walk until you hear someone singing upstairs in their apartment. Go and find that music that exists in the city in the summertime. The windows are open. Finally, people are starting to come outside, share their lives a bit more. And that's what's so beautiful about early summer, is that period when everyone just opens the windows and breathes and lets the air in and lets a little bit more of themselves out. And one of the things I've always loved most about living in a city is being able to walk at night in the city and hear lives happening, hear people practicing their saxophones or singing opera or listening to a record. It's a reminder that we're not alone. And it's a reminder that no matter how small our life gets, we're trying to find ways to make it beautiful. So that's my pick this week, is people practicing in their apartments. Go find them and give them a little round of applause. They could use some encouragement, I'm sure.
Love it.
Love it. I love you. I love all of you.
Love you, man.
Soft Revolution will be back next week with more conversations about the intersection between art and politics and how to survive this crazy shit we're all living in. Be an artist. Go out there and hustle. Work hard. Stay healthy. Wear a mask. And we'll see you next time.
Dándole combate a un río, así es como se enamora tu corazón con el mío. Yo vi de una garza mora dándole combate a un río. Así es como se enamora. Así es como se enamora tu corazón con el mío. Tu corazón con el mío. Luna, luna, luna llena me guante. Luna, luna, luna llena me guante. Anda muchacho a la casa y me trae la carabina para matar este gavilán que no me deja gallina. La luna me está mirando, yo no sé lo que me ve. Yo tengo la ropa limpia, ayer tarde la lavé. La luna me está mirando, yo no sé lo que me ve. Yo tengo la ropa limpia. Yo tengo la ropa limpia, ayer tarde la lavé. Ayer tarde la lavé. Luna, luna, luna llena me guante.